And if I can get Bill Wilson to stop talking long enough, we'll go ahead and start the meeting. Actually, I didn't think Bill was going to be here. He had a procedure he was going to go through, but they went ahead and canceled it, so he was able to come. I wanted to thank everybody for coming. There are a couple of people that are here that I should introduce. John Cannon and his wife are here. John, thank you very much for coming. We kind of got our wires crossed. He had agreed to come, and somehow we didn't get the message, so we almost had to throw him back out the door, but we were able to keep him. So thank you very much for coming. So there are 3 societies that are involved that we kind of work together. There's the Wicomico Historical Society, there's the Lower Delmarva Genealogy Society, and Preservation Trust of Wicomico. And the 3 societies work together quite a bit in different organizations, in different venues. We'll set up a table together and actually, so we don't have to buy 3 tables to set up. You can see our sign over there, Wicomico Historical Society, and each one of our groups has a sign like that so that we can put them all around and have one cubicle with all 3 organizations. We pretty much do the same thing except in a different way. The Historical Society, of course, we're very interested in history. The Lower Delmarva Genealogy Society is interested in genealogy. They're the ones who have the library that we utilize. So that's different, but it's the same. We have a lot of history books in our library as well as genealogy. We've got about 16 feet of genealogy and autobiographies. The Preservation Trust is involved with trying to keep places from falling down, to try to keep places that are in bad shape and keep them going. So all 3 of these organizations are trying to work together and accomplish different things, but to the same end. Just so you know, if there's anyone out there who would like to join our board and be part of us, we would certainly appreciate having you, and we can put you to work. Last year, we finished a number of different projects that we were working on. We finished the move that we had with the Nutters voting house. We ended up moving that from where it was located. Now, the Nutters voting house used to be on Snow Hill Road. It was out where a development was called Hollywood Development, which probably 90% of the people don't know where that is. There was a road that comes off of it called Cardinal Drive, and it became a circle, and one side of the circle was Meadowlark Drive and one side was Cardinal Drive. And I used to live there, and I voted in the voting house twice. And then they closed it up. I guess I didn't vote right. I'm not sure what it was. But at least I got to vote there a couple times, and I remembered what it looked like. The county ended up giving it to the Historical Society, and we moved it to Fruitland Water Plant. And we kept it there for quite a few years. We actually went through, repainted it. We had to have the roof replaced. We ended up taking the chimney out. They had when it was in location, it had a stove which they would make the stove work during voting, and then that's all they would use it for. And when they moved it, they had one voting machine that went with it. And I think that voting machine is still in the voting house. It's an older voting machine. But in any case, that was moved and it's been redone. It looks great. If you guys, if you look in your brochures that some of you have, you'll see that voting house in there. So that's one of the things we completed. We have had it moved. We have signed it over to the city of Fruitland, and they now own it. Our second project is the Wicomico School, which we have been involved with that for many years. Thanks to our relationship with the school and the school board, it has been power washed and repainted and looks great. Mr. Bob Sousa, am I speaking that right? And this is the gentleman right here. And his wife Deborah is here. And we thank you so much for taking care of that and all you have done for that. So I really appreciate that. So they're with the school facilities, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now we will be having the school open May 19th. Sunday, the May 19th. It will be open from 1 to 4. It'll be an open house, and a number of us will be there to allow you to take a look at just what an old one-room schoolhouse looked like. So if you haven't been, that's a good opportunity for you to be there, and hopefully we'll have that open a number of times, but that will be the closest time that will be happening. Now that schoolhouse, if you go by there, you'll see that there's a sign out front. It's a metal sign, one of those roadside signs that the state puts up. It's a metal sign, and it tells about the schoolhouse and gives some history on it. But unless you stop there, you can't really tell much about it. So we want to put up a sign that goes over the doorway and tells that it's the Wicomico School. Let's see, let me say it right. The Wicomico one-room school with a C, 1872, which is when it was built. And so we would like a sign that says that. And my friend over here, Matt Walski, has agreed to make that sign for us. I have it's actually not wood, it's the same kind of material that you use to build a deck with. So it's that deck board, and that's what the sign's going to be made out of. It'll be 4-inch letters, and it will go over the door. So Matt and his wife are here today, and we thank you very much, Matt. Now, Matt's originally from Canada, so he's not local, but he is local because they've been here for quite a while. Matt and his wife, Brittany, are here. Now, Brittany has been around here for quite a while. Brittany's grandfather was actually Jack Savage, so many of you probably know Jack. Yeah. So they lead our Saturday night church service at Christ Methodist Church. So I just wanted you to know where that all comes from. Our third project this year has been a cleanup of local graveyards. And there are a couple graveyards that we work on. One is on Ward Road. It's just a small graveyard just before you get to Airport Road, and that's kind of a personal project of mine. That's Ward's and Johnson's are in there, and many of you know Pat Taylor, and she works at Pemberton, and Pat's family are Johnsons, and that's a part of her family as well that's there. So a couple of the people over here, Ron and Kathy, have been helping out with cleaning that, as well as another graveyard that we have that we're working on. The other graveyard is the other graveyard has the remains of a Mr. Toadvin. He just happens to be the first mayor of Salisbury, and he's in that graveyard, as well as a number of the Toadvin family, and also some of the early Handy family are in that graveyard. That graveyard was in very bad repair. Trees were falling down on the gravestones and breaking them off, and so we went in and cleaned that up. Let's see, the fourth project we took on this year was the purchase of 1,000 17th century bricks. Now, why would we buy 17th century bricks? Well, because to match 17th century bricks, they don't look like today's bricks. They're larger, they're not made exactly the same, and if you go to Salisbury Brick Company and say, I want a brick, they're not going to give you what you need. So we bought 1,000 bricks, 17th century bricks, to be used at Green Hill Church. Now, we have done things with Green Hill Church before. One of our first projects when we actually started up in 1934 was a project with Green Hill Church. So we're continuing to do projects with Green Hill Church. We also pledged an amount for a new sign for Frederick Douglass. This sign will be put on the courthouse lawn, and we pledged an amount, and unless it goes up, we don't end up having to pay that amount, but we have pledged an amount toward that sign. Saturday, June 8th at 10:30 a.m., the Sons of the American Revolution are hosting a grave marking ceremony for Henry Handy at the Parsons Cemetery. The DAR will be hosting another event later that day at Pemberton Hall. So there again, we talk about the Handys. The Handys have been around a long time. They were actually, when they did in North Salisbury, they did an area that they were clearing out for a mall in there and ran across some Handy graves. They ended up taking what was left of them, and the Handys were back here in the 1700s, and moved what was left out to Pemberton. So most of the Handys are going to be at Pemberton, other than a few that we've got in a few other places. So that pretty much ends the announcements that I had. I would like Brittany Walski to go ahead and say grace for us.
Good evening. Please bow your heads with me. Divine Creator, thank you for this day and all the blessings that we experience each and every day. As we gather tonight in celebration of history and heritage, we offer our gratitude for the richness of the past that shapes our present. We give thanks for this delicious food before us, sustenance for our body as we nourish ourselves and our souls. Bless this historic society, its members, and all those who cherish the stories who came before us. May this evening be filled with camaraderie, wisdom, and inspiration as we honor the legacies that have paved the way for our journey. Guide our conversations and our reflections that we may continue to preserve, learn, and grow from the lessons of history. It is in your Son's holy and precious name we pray. Amen.
Thank you.
I'm Ann Suthalski. I'm a member of the board of the Wicomico Historic Society. I want to set the scene for this evening. Any Thursday, 5 o'clock, I'm in my chair with my remote in my hand, and I'm turning on WBOC TV, Channel 16, Delmarva Life, in great anticipation, because it is on Thursdays that Jim Duffy, author of Secrets of the Eastern Shore and storyteller, comes on to keep us spellbound about what we are going to hear. You never know what Jim is going to do. It could be a very serious story, or it could be one that you laugh about for months and months after you hear it. I would like to present to my friends here this evening Jim Duffy, author and storyteller extraordinaire.
Thank you, Ann. I appreciate that introduction. It runs the risk of giving me a very big head. So we need to compensate for that by starting out with a story in which I do something that I'm very good at. Make a fool of myself. It's the only story I'm going to tell. We'll tell 4 stories, maybe 5 stories tonight, and get you home by bedtime, promise. It's the only one in which I am a character. It's still a historical story, though, as you can see. I have a few years on me. Late 1990s, perhaps the year 2000, maybe at the latest. I am living in Baltimore. I am working in the magazine world as a freelance writer. And one of the magazines up there hires me to go down to Tillman Island and do one of these little, what the heck are you going to do for a weekend on Tillman Island away? Stories. And I go down there and I do it. You know, a lot of people, everybody's been to Tillman at some point or another, probably? Yeah. The most famous description of it is it's a place that just gets up and goes to work. An old waterman said that a number of years ago. It's a little bit less true. Now they got all the big city people in the retirement homes there, but historically, very accurate. Also, Tillman trivia. As of 2018, last I looked, it was the busiest drawbridge in the United States of America. There were 10,620 bridge openings in the year 2018. No bridge in the country went up and down more often. I ended up, while doing this story, aboard the skipjack Rebecca Ruark with the legendary Captain Wade Murphy. Captain Murphy enjoys this story. He can be cantankerous sometimes, and he was in a very cantankerous mood that day. This is a time when the crab population is in real trouble. Everybody's blaming the watermen and the farmers. Now, an aside, where I start to make a fool of myself. I'm Mr. Big City Boy. I have been in an environmental studies program at Johns Hopkins for 5 years. I'm reading the Bay Journal cover to cover like my wife reads the Sunday comics cover to cover. Right? I'm going on field trips with experts. I'm listening to experts in lectures. And I, Mr. Big City Boy, think I am an expert. I'm trying to get a feel for this place I've never been to before. All Captain Murphy wants to talk about is what he calls ghost pots. All right? Some of you probably know what those are. They are discarded, broken crab pots that watermen throw overboard or get detached from a line, and they sit in the bottom of the river or the bay. And all he wants to talk about the whole time we're on this boat is how these pots are the reason, one of the big reasons for the crab population. 5 years in the Hopkins program, 5 at least years of reading the Bay Journal cover to cover. Never have I heard this nonsense. And I'm embarrassed to tell you that what was running through my head that day is, what is this crazy waterman talking about? Let me read to you. That was 1999, 2000. There have been many reminders of what a fool I was that day since then. All headlines from the Bay Journal. February 2006. They check in and they don't check out. Abandoned ghost crab pots haunt Bay's bottom, luring creatures to their doom. January 2008. Derelict pots raise specter of ghost fishing. Lost traps, numbering in the thousands, continue to catch crabs, fish on Bay's bottom. April 2010. Watermen pull 10,500 derelict pots from the bay and its rivers. June 2013. Ghost pots estimated to kill 1.25 million crabs in Virginia's bay waters. December 2016. Derelict pots kill 3.3 million crabs annually in the bay. I've got a couple more listed. They go on and on. Every couple of years, the Bay Journal arrives at my house, and I'm like, man, what a fool I was, right? There's always fishermen and environmentalists talking to the odds. There's farmers and environmentalists talking to the odds. There's forestry people and environmentalists talking to the odds. Who's right and who's wrong? That's way the heck above my pay grade. Right? But what I learned that day, there's a wisdom that comes from many generations of working the water and working the land, and you ignore that wisdom at your own peril. That was story number one, and I call it wisdom on the water. All right? Second story. About the time that the Choptank River very nearly played a role in revolutionizing global transportation. My journey to this story actually started in Salisbury, in a way. I had heard that Amelia Earhart landed in the little airport that used to be in Hebron in the late 1920s, and they had a little parade for her coming down into Salisbury, and I was looking this up in the old newspaper. I can't tell you how many stories I find this way. I was looking that up in the old newspaper. I'm reading it. A headline right next to it catches my eye. It says, "Seadrome to be launched in Choptank soon." I'm like, what's a seadrome? Now, before I go on, I got to get a little bit literary with you here, because there's a perfect quote for this story from a Czech writer named Milan Kundera, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's about looking at the past that you all and I am so passionate about. Man proceeds in the fog, but when he looks back to judge the people in the past, he sees no fog on their path. From his present, which was their faraway future, their path looks perfectly clear to him. Good visibility all the way. Looking back, he sees the path, he sees the people proceeding, he sees their mistakes. What he doesn't see is the fog. And this is a story about that fog. In 1929, everybody knew the word seadrome in the way we know about solar panels and offshore wind turbines. The photo in that newspaper article in 1929 showed a forest of steel girders. This was a project from a guy from Delaware who worked for DuPont named Edward Armstrong. He ended up working on it for 25 years, from 1920 through 1940, somewhere in that range. And his goal was to get people across the ocean on an airplane. When he started, no one had done that yet. Eventually, Lindbergh did it, Earhart did it, but they did it in tiny, death-defying, Pringle can-like death traps, right? And here comes the fog. If you took a poll of the experts back at that time, yes, there were people working on making planes bigger. But if you took a poll of the experts, they would have said that it was physically impossible to build something like a 747. It's not going to, the laws of nature would not allow that much size, that much fuel, that much weight, all those people. Never going to happen. Out of the question. There was a little bit of passenger service started in the 1930s. You could get like 400 miles. So if the wind was behind you, maybe you could make it from the Salisbury Airport to Pittsburgh. And that's it. And this is what Armstrong thought the limits of things were. This is what a whole bunch of people, as we'll see, thought the limits of the thing were. So here was his idea. He's going to build a seadrome, 4 football fields long, with hydraulic air-powered things going down into the ocean. And it's really an engineering marvel. And it's going to keep, in storm, steamship going by, whatever is going on, it's going to keep the landing platform stable. And he's going to put one of these every 400 miles from New York to England. It's easy to laugh at this, right? All right. It passed the chop tank test, moves into the next stage. It's going to take you a while stopping to refuel every 400 miles to get across the ocean, but it's still going to be a whole heck of a lot faster than a steamship. My favorite part, he had a vision for how to make this really fun. On every landing pad, there would be diversions, bars, cafes, hotels. I'm sure over time we would advance to casinos, Ferris wheels. Who's buying the kids or grandkids tickets to the Taylor Swift concert out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? Right? So what happened? 1, Great Depression, money hard to come by. 2, politics. President Roosevelt was excited about it in the early 1930s, then he had some budget problems, and he pulled funding forward, then he brought funding back. It was all the delays, it took a little time. But the third is the most interesting one, because it gets at how many people were walking in the fog. And that is the legal complications. If somebody got drunk while frolicking on a seadrome and got in a fight in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, who arrests him? You're not in a country. What jail does he fly to? What judge does he go before? People spent an enormous amount of energy figuring this out. Now, think about this. More than 20 countries set up laws governing what happens on seadromes. Think about all of those committee meetings, all those calls for public input, all those votes, all those amendments, all that time, in 20 countries. That's how sure people were that the seadrome was going to solve the problem of getting people across the ocean, not our big giant airplanes. They were walking through the fog. We look back and we laugh, right? The seadrome became a little footnote to history. It might reappear. There's talk in Japan where they have a lot of land shortages on their coastal cities about basically using the seadrome for airports, building them out in the sea instead of on the valuable land. If I had to draw one comparison to what this plays out like, I mentioned earlier the solar arrays and the windmills. I don't know what the proper solution to our energy things is, but it would be as if 50 or 100 years from now, some goofball was up here talking about Milan Kundera's fog and going, can you believe those people sat through all those meetings about all those solar panels and all those wind turbines offshore, and they passed all those laws when the solution was really so simple? That was story number 2. Special request from Ann. I didn't used to tell this story in the 4 or 5 times a year. I come out to groups and and tell stories. I kind of have a little greatest hits collection, if you will. And I didn't used to tell it until I was in Harrington at an event. Harrington's weirdly a little confusing to get around. So I park and I go to the event, and I'm coming back, and I kind of lose track of where the Civic Center is. And so I walk up, a guy's wearing an orange jacket, there's a road closure, and he's managing the traffic. And I walk up to him, and I'm about to say, "Can you point me to the Civic Center? Because I can't figure out where my car is." When he looked at me and pointed to another guy in an orange jacket and said, "Could you tell him the black cat story for me?" Because he'd heard me tell it on Delmarva Life. So ever since the construction guy stopped me and asked for the black cat story, this has been in the regular rotation. The history of Poplar Island. Not the rebuilt short history, but the longer history. Has one interesting chapter after another. Native American times. It was actually first discovered not by the British, but by a Spanish explorer in the 1500s. English arrived in the 1600s, occupied by the British in the War of 1812. Big time haven for rum runners and prohibition. Vacation spot for 2 US presidents. But this is not a big and newsworthy story. It is a weird and ridiculous one that I would like to share. Story begins in 1847. The island is still a big place back then, not, if there's boaters in the crowd who went out that way, not the little sliver you might remember before it disappeared. It covered 1,000 acres. Back then, ran 3 miles long. Closest place on land, back to where we started, Tillman Island. A weird advertisement gets printed in newspapers in Tillman and other parts of Talbot County. A shop owner named R.O. Ridgway is offering cash money in exchange for black female cats. He wants to buy 1,000 black female cats, and he will pay 25 cents hard cash for every black female cat that is brought either to Poplar Island or to his store. Ridgway has been hired to do this. He is working for a man named Charles Carroll, a very famous family in Annapolis. His grandfather signed the Declaration of Independence. That grandfather, I believe, was also the one who put Poplar Island in the family by purchasing it. And it was still in the family. They mostly used it over those couple of generations for a little farming and mostly for grazing animals. But Charles Carroll, the grandson, has a business idea that must have seemed really brilliant to him at the time. He wanted to create the great Poplar Island Black Cat Farm. Yes, a fur farm in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay. Black cats only. As hard as it is to think about, cat fur has a long history in human fashion and clothing. It's where the phrase, "more than one way to skin a cat," comes from. Archaeologists think ancient humans were making clothes from cat fur, and not just big cats, cute little ones too. Charles Carroll had heard, perhaps rightly, I haven't been able to quite nail this part of the story down, but he had heard that there was a big market for black cat fur hats and scarves in China. There may have been some truth to that. I've seen things like on places like Wikipedia or whatever that said they do use black cat fur, had used it in China. Black cats are also a symbol of good luck, not bad luck in China. So he hired Ridgway to put these ads in the paper. Ridgway rounds up all these female cats. He puts them on the island. He hires a local waterman. Waterman's only job is to catch as much fish as he can, dump that fish on the island, so all the cats have something to eat. He also would like the population to continue, so he puts a few male tomcats on the island, just a handful. One historian guy who wrote the Disappearing Islands of the Chesapeake at the Johns Hopkins Press put it better than I ever would have come up with. He said, "All went well at first, especially for the tomcats." Alas, it went well at first. And the failure of Charles Carroll's brilliant business idea was all Mother Nature's fault. She delivered an uncommonly deep freeze, even for those days when deep freezes were much more common. When's the last time people were driving Volkswagen Bugs on the Choptank River and Wicomico River here was 77, 78, right? Things like that used to happen every 5-ish years, 8-ish years, big, giant, deep freeze. And this happened in one of those early years after the cats were put on Poplar Island. The watermen couldn't get out, couldn't fish, couldn't drop food off for the cats on the island. Nobody could get to the island. The cats get hungry. I like to imagine the cat, the one cat who set out in search of food across the ice from Poplar Island to Tillman Island. Whoever that brave explorer of a cat was started a stampede of cats who left Poplar Island across the ice and marched on to Tillman Island. And now I need you all to put yourself in a warm seat beside the fire in your little cabin in Tillman Island in the 1850s and look out the window and see all those black cats coming at you. If I could imagine a happy ending and be a fiction writer and write this story and have it end in the perfect way, for me, I don't know how many of you have cats at home. My wife always has a collection of 2 to 4 cats in our house. You know how sometimes you leave them outside in the rain, you kind of forgot, the door's closed. Finally, after an hour or 2, you open that door and there's that look. I thought you loved me. My happy ending would have at least one of those cats finding the way to the person who sold him to James Ridgway. Lady Eglantine. Do we have any takers on yes, I know everything about Lady Eglantine? Yay! That's the way I like it. Sounds like some Scandinavian royalty moved to the Eastern Shore, right? No, Lady Eglantine is a chicken. But she is a very important chicken. She was born on April 15, 1914, on a farm outside of Greensboro, Maryland. Her name came from the abundance, if there are gardeners in the crowd, the abundance of wild pink roses that adorned that farm. They are called Eglantine roses. Most chickens at that time laid 70 eggs in a year. The world's record for egg laying was 288. In 1915, at the tender age of 1, Lady Eglantine crushed that record and laid 314 eggs. Times were different. I'm going to go back to the same well I've been to 2 times before with our energy situation. Before, in those years, from 1880-ish to the end of World War I, immigration through the roof of the country. Numbers that, if you do them by percentages, numbers that far outstrip what's going on today, whether you're talking about just legal immigration or you add in the undocumented illegal immigration. Much more immigration coming in. That's when my grandparents came in, as a matter of fact. The big worry then, like we worry about energy supplies, was how to feed all of these people, 1. And 2, and I'm not saying this in a crass way, I'm saying this in a good way, was there's much more business opportunities for farmers. How do farmers make the most money they can now that this market is getting bigger and bigger and bigger every year? So people were extremely interested in farm productivity issues, like breeding chickens that laid more eggs. And the guy who owned Lady Eglantine was in fact a department store owner in Philadelphia, a hobbyist in this area, a weekender farmer in Greensboro who had bred Lady Eglantine to challenge and break that world record. She became quite the media celebrity. Like many of you, perhaps, I use a newspaper database of old newspapers called newspapers.com. And if you plug in quotes, Lady Eglantine, in that rough time period of 1915 to 1916, you will get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hits from papers all over the country. She was known as the $100,000 hen. She was the guest of honor at a New York trade show at the Grand Central Palace. The owner I mentioned was from Philadelphia. He made a big deal out of this appearance. He started the journey in Philadelphia, his hometown, where he got Lady Eglantine a suite by herself at the Walton Hotel and threw her a big going away party. The next morning, as they went to the train station to hop a train for New York, there was a giant civic parade in her honor, complete with police motorcycle escorts. This is my favorite part of the story. It really is in the old newspaper accounts that when the police would come, the owner would come, and when Lady Eglantine finally, the ultimate in the parade, when she reached this 12 o'clock point, the gentlemen would doff their caps. All the people lining the parade route. She gets to New York. Oh, I'm sorry. She has her own sleeper car on the train with an entourage of 21 humans, including a personal chef. In New York, they have a special welcome reception for her at Penn Station, her coupe awash in pink eglantine roses. The New York Times reported that at one point she dropped a feather, and there was a mad dash among the spectators to see who was going to get that souvenir. She was checked into the Imperial Suite and eventually made her appearance at the Grand Central Palace. The New York Times summarized her appearance in the city by saying there is more factitious fuss awarded to this chicken than is customarily accorded the prima donna of a royal opera company. Lady Eglantine passed from this earth on August 6th, 1960. As I've already made clear, her owner was very, very attached for very good reason to her, and so he promptly took her to the taxidermist, which is why the next time you're headed up to Greensboro, it's just north of Denton. If you're headed up that way, call in advance, make an appointment to get inside the very rarely open Greensboro Historical Society so that you too can pay your respects to Lady Eglantine. I am not making this up. Am I doing all right? Should I do one more or should I do two more? Two?
How old was she? How old was she when she died?
3.
Okay.
3. 3. Should I do a serious one or a funny one? Funny? Stick with the funny? Let's stick with the funny. All right. 1913. Delaware adopts a new law requiring that couples who want to get married, when they file for a license, there is a waiting period. They can't get married that night. New York and Pennsylvania already have those laws on the books. And what this means is that if you get drunk, meet someone who's drunk, and decide you have to get married that night, the only solution, if you're in Philadelphia or New York or Wilmington or anywhere up in all those big giant cities, is to get on a train and go to Elkton, Maryland, where you don't have to wait. Right? They passed that law in 1913 and 1912. The year before that, Elkton issued 200 marriage licenses. In 1936, they issued 11,791 marriage licenses. More than 20 wedding chapels were operating along the main street of Elkton. There were some idiosyncrasies in this trade. For whatever reason, never been able to dig into that or figure it out. No, the wedding chapels were not allowed to advertise. So they had to do little workarounds like businesses do when faced with such things. And some taxi drivers stepped in. So they would be attached to a certain wedding chapel. And they would do their best to be the most attractive taxi to the couple getting off of the train. Blurry-eyed couple, perhaps, getting off of the train. And these taxi drivers would get kickbacks from the chapel that they were attached to. I put this little story on my website several years ago, and a woman wrote in. Her name was Andrea Bolden Gagliano. And she said, my aunt, Pauline Bolden, was married to Harry Hedgie Woolman. During the Elkton Chapel heyday, they would ride on motorcycles in front of potential and just married couples, with my aunt riding on Hedgie's shoulders and doing all kinds of tricks. She said times were tough, and that was a quick way to make a buck. Well, that's a rabbit hole I pretty much had to jump down. And I did some research, and it turns out that Hedgie had lots of tricks. One of them, my favorite, was he would lead the couple through downtown without Aunt Pauline or whoever it was on his shoulders, just by himself, but he would be seated backwards on his motorcycle, presumably with some mirror set up that allowed him to drive backwards down the street, leading him to the wedding chapel. Lots of famous Hollywood people got married there. There was all kinds of interplay back then between Hollywood and New York theater worlds, and the actors and actresses were constantly in New York. So Joan Fontaine, Martha Ray, Debbie Reynolds, all got married in Elkton. There's one guy whose name I have never been able to figure out, alas, but he was a Hollywood producer. And he was very struck by Hedgie's act. And he told Hedgie to come out to Los Angeles, and he'd help him find some work. And he did. Have you ever seen the original Hollywood version of Hunchback of Notre Dame with Charles Laughton? There's a famous scene in there. It's set in a narrow alleyway where the damsel is in distress, is about to get hung from the gallows. And the hunchback swoops down this narrow alleyway and scoops her up and flies up, and they go through a window, and he saves the damsel in distress. Newsflash, that was not Charles Laughton. That was Hedgie from Elkton. He became a stuntman. Pretty successful one, too. Hedgie Woolman. Now, that era all came to an end in 1938. I have two more things I have to say. I promised a woman I was going to say something. Came to an end in 1938. Maryland adopted a waiting period, too. Every county in the state, except Cecil County, voted in favor of ending the waiting period. But Cecil County was outvoted. I told this story one night. And as I said at the beginning, I've got a few years on me. My knee gets bad sometimes. Sometimes I don't really walk all that good anymore, so I'm not making some ageist comment here. But an older woman got up and she kind of doddered towards me. She said, she had a look. She said, I want you to know one thing. Not everyone who got married in Elkton was drunk. I promised her I was going to say that to end this story every time I told the story from here on out. And I am a man of my word. I was going to close with kind of like this, I don't know, a little serious, not maudlin, but inspirational little thing. But there was a conversation going on here at the table that I was sitting at. I decided to change my mind. They were talking about kind of construction projects and getting construction projects done and all that. So I decided to change, and also inspired by our lovely invocation that was given here. because I would like to, with all due respect, tell you about the greatest invocation in the history of the world. Story is set on Hoper's Island. Everybody's familiar, Hoper's Island, the end of the world in Dorchester County. Used to be 3 islands. Now there's only 2. Before 1980, to get from lower Hoopers to middle Hoopers, or is it upper Hoopers to middle Hoopers, to get from one island to the other, you had to cross a rickety, 1-lane, wooden bridge. It's a big stretch of water, too. And it had to pull off in the middle so the cars coming in opposite directions could kind of figure out how to pass each other. And this bridge was always filled with crabbers, fishermen, six-packs, water, food, coolers, barely enough room for your car to get by. The magnificent writer, Tom Horton, once described it this way. It is the longest, narrowest, clatteringest old wooden bridge in Maryland. No matter how far you've come on your journey, crossing it is the most memorable part of your trip. Alas, in 1980, the bridge needs replacing. Tides are washing up over it at inopportune times. The wood's getting old. They don't even let school buses across anymore. School buses only go to the edge of the bridge, and the parents have to bring their kids across the bridge to the school bus. It's getting a little rickety. So Dorchester County starts looking to replace the bridge. The first estimate they got was for $500,000. Now, before I go on, I have to ask a question I should ask at the beginning, and I forgot. Are there any federal government engineers in the construction game in the House? Thank God, it would have been hard to back out of this story. Dorchester County learns that there is a matching grant program with the federal government. They go, sure, $250,000 is all we have to pay instead of $500,000. What a bargain. Then those federal engineers got involved. The people of Hoper's Island wanted basically a little bit nicer version of the bridge they had, a little higher so the tide doesn't wash over it, a little wider so 2 cars can get by, a little extra room for the fishermen and the coolers and the six-packs. But the federal engineers did not think that was a safe or lasting solution. They wanted every safety bell and whistle that they could get. And the bridge, which some of you I'm sure have crossed over today, that is the bridge that got built. The final design is 35 feet over the water. Nobody's fishing from that. And the final price tag, $3.5 million. They had a grand opening ceremony on September 6th, 1980. That was another reason, because all the conversation I had here tonight, there was everybody saying, oh gosh, you remember that guy? Oh man, what a character. Oh gosh, yeah, I haven't seen him in a while. Oh, he's a character. There's a character in Dorchester County, may he rest in peace, named Tom Flowers.
The old honker.
The old honker. I was going to get to that. Tom Flowers was a county council. He was a Hoper's Island native. County council, school board, school teacher. He had a newspaper column in which he called himself the Old Honker and told stories of life on Hoper's Island. He has a lovely book out of stories about his childhood on Hoper's Island. They made the mistake of inviting that city councilman to give the invocation at the grand opening of the new bridge. We are, of course, in the middle of nowhere. There's probably 20, 25 people out there. Tom Flowers told no one what he was about to do and proceeded to offer this prayer. Father, today we are gathered here to dedicate a bridge that is a monument to man's stupidity, a monument to man's waste, a monument to government interference and inefficiency. There is no need for such an elaborate structure as this which is so out of place, out of keeping in the peaceful and lovely environment of South Dorchester County. We should this day learn a lesson and be aware of the great waste of taxpayers' money, over $3 million. We should this day be aware of the loss of resources that our children and grandchildren will suffer because of this. We ask our great Creator and Father to bless this bridge and our families, our friends, and our visitors who will use this structure to meet their needs, knowing that wind, wave, and tide are daily at work destroying that which has been built. In the name of Jesus, our Father, amen. Obviously, the reaction in the moment was stunned silence among the 25 gathered people who he had given no advance warning of his plans. But one of those people was a reporter with a local newspaper whose story then got picked up by the AP and the UPI. The New York Times headline on this story was "Bombshell of a Dedication." Newspapers from Honolulu to Portland, Maine, newspaper in Singapore wrote about this. People magazine, Walter Cronkite, and Flowers always took great joy in the fact that he got letters from all over the world from people who congratulated him on the greatest invocation in the history of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming.